Okay, so let's just jump right in because I think we need to talk about the feeling that, well, that probably brought a lot of you here today.
Hmm.
We're all carrying things, right?
Yeah.
Health stuff, the constant pressure of just making a living, family dynamics that are messy.
The general exhaustion of trying to keep it all together.
Exactly. And then when you think about spiritual work
Hmm.
or even just self-improvement, what's the feeling that usually comes up?
It's almost always seriousness, a kind of gravity, the sense that to really achieve anything meaningful, you have to be somber, dedicated, maybe even a little anxious that you're not doing it right.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
the feeling. And then you hear a phrase like the one we're digging into, sing and rejoice. And it just feels, I don't know, completely disconnected.
It can feel like a bit of spiritual gaslighting almost.
Yes, my life is this complicated mess of real problems, and you're telling me to just be happy. It feels less like a solution and more like an impossible demand.
And that dissonance, that very feeling, is
Mm.
actually the whole point. The thing is, our logical brain, the part that says, okay, first fix my problems, then I'll be happy.
Which sounds perfectly reasonable.
It sounds completely reasonable, but according to the Chassidic discourse we're looking at, Rani V'Simch'i, that very linear thinking is the trap.
So you're saying that the idea of problem first, joy second. It's not just slow, it's actually backwards.
Exactly. It puts us in a passive role, just waiting for conditions to be perfect. So the big question we have to tackle is this. Is joy a reward for when the darkness is gone? Or is joy the active tool you use to transform the darkness into light right here, right now?
That reframes joy completely, not as an emotion, but as a technology almost.
That's a great way to put it. It's a technology of transformation.
So where does this revolutionary idea come from? Let's get to the source.
Okay, so it's anchored in a verse from the prophet Zechariah, and the verse is, "Sing and rejoice, O daughter of Zion, for behold, I come and I will dwell in your midst."
Okay, in your midst, let's slow down on that phrase. Because the commentary, especially from the Rebbe, points out a tiny linguistic detail here that changes everything.
It's absolutely critical. The prophet could have said, "I will dwell in it," referring to the holy temple.
Right, in the building.
Yeah.
In some abstract holy place.
Exactly. And if he'd said that, it would imply that the divine presence needs a perfect, pristine, already holy place to show up. It would mean we have to get our lives totally cleaned up first.
But he doesn't say that.
He doesn't. By saying, "in your midst," the prophet is making a radical, incredibly personal claim.
Which means for you, listening right now, the divine isn't waiting for you to be perfect. It's not interested in some abstract future version of you. It seeks to enter your life, your messy, complicated, real-world life.
Your home, your business, your heart, whatever state they're in today.
And the instruction, sing and rejoice, isn't the celebration at the end.
Mm.
It's the prerequisite. It's the key that opens the door for that presence to come into the most mundane parts of your life.
Joy is the delivery mechanism.
I have to ask the question that I know is on everyone's mind, though. If I'm facing, say, a huge financial problem, isn't forcing myself to be joyful just denial? Am I not just ignoring a very real issue?
That is a crucial distinction. And no, it's not about denial. To get it, we have to understand what this state of being we're in actually is. The sources define this experience of confusion and overwhelm as exile or galut.
And you don't just mean a geographical exile.
Not at all. It's a spiritual state. The masters compare it to being in a dream, the state of, "I am sleeping."
And in a dream, things can seem terrifying, illogical.
Exactly. That debt, that illness, that argument,
Hmm.
in the dream of exile, they feel like these huge, separate, independent monsters. They feel disconnected from any higher reality or purpose.
Even though, theologically, the ultimate truth is there's nothing else besides him. But in the dream, you don't feel that. You just see the shadows.
Precisely. And that feeling of separation is the exile. So redemption, or Gila, is defined very simply as the awakening. My heart is awake.
When you wake up, you realize the monster was just a pile of clothes on a chair.
The problem might still be there, but your perception of its power, of its reality, has completely shifted.
So if we're all in this dream, how do we wake ourselves up? What's the spiritual alarm clock?
And that brings us back to joy. The sources say joy is the most potent alarm clock for the soul. And this leads to this really radical concept called teshuva ila'ah.
Higher repentance. Okay, we need to spend a minute here because this really flips the script on how most people think about repentance or teshuva.
For sure. I mean, traditionally what's called teshuva tata, or lower repentance, that involves seriousness. Looking back at your mistakes, feeling regret. It's all focused on the past.
And it can be exhausting. It feels like you're just dragging yourself through the mud of your own failures.
It is essential, but yes, it can be a real emotional morass. But Teshuva Ilaha, this higher form, it kind of bypasses all that. It doesn't look backward. It says that if you can generate such intense, overwhelming joy in the present,
By doing what?
by recognizing that presence is already in your midst, that joy is so powerful that the negativity from the past, it just dissipates. It's not fought against. It's just overwhelmed by a much greater light.
So it's not that you're ignoring the darkness. You're just introducing a force so bright that the darkness literally can't exist in the same space.
It's transformed. The darkness itself is turned into light. One of the analogies used is that joy isn't the light bulb, it's the switch that lets the current flow.
Or, and I love this one, it's the mikdak, the drill.
Yes. The drill that you use to pierce through that thick wall of materialism and confusion, that feeling of being alone that keeps us locked in the dream, you use joy to drill a hole and let the light flood in.
That makes joy sound less like a feeling and more like an action, like a form of intense spiritual work.
It has to be an act. It has to be generated, especially when you feel it least.
Okay, let's make this really concrete with an analogy from the sources that I think just perfectly captures this whole idea. The difference between an inspection and a visit.
This one really helps you identify your own default mode.
All right, so imagine this. You get a call. A high-ranking official, an auditor, an inspector is coming to your house tomorrow to check that everything is up to code. What's the feeling?
Oh, immediate stress. Panic.
Total panic. You're running around, you're cleaning, you're hiding the mess, the dishes in the sink, the pile of mail, all of it becomes a source of anxiety. You're terrified you won't measure up.
That anxiety, that feeling that you have to be perfect before you can be seen, that is the spiritual mindset of exile.
Okay, now contrast that with scenario 2, the beloved visit. Imagine, completely out of the blue, your child or your grandchild who's been traveling abroad for a year just shows up, knocks on the door. There they are.
What's your first thought about the state of the house?
It doesn't even register. The dishes, the dust, the clutter, who cares? It is completely and totally irrelevant because the sheer spontaneous joy of that reunion just fills the entire space with light.
And that's the synthesis. The sources are teaching that God is the beloved relative, not the inspector. In our exile mindset, we act like we're preparing for an inspection, creating all this stress, but joy comes from remembering the relationship itself.
I come and I will dwell in your midst, regardless of the clutter.
Right, and what happens is that pure joy, that light, makes the dishes in the sink, our daily problems, shrink. You get perspective. You can finally deal with them from a place of love and connection, not from a place of fear.
This brings us perfectly to the story of the Baal Shem Tov, which shows this principle in the most simple, physical, and grounded way possible.
Yes, and it's such a challenge to the idea that spirituality means rejecting the physical world.
To set the scene for us.
You have the Baal Shem Tov students. They're brilliant, they're sincere, and they're engaged in intense ascetic practices, sigufim. They're fasting, they're barely sleeping. They see their bodies and the material world as an obstacle to be broken.
They see a plate of food as a burden, not a blessing.
Exactly. So the Baal Shem Tov takes them to a simple roadside inn, and they see this peasant, a simple, unrefined guy, come in after a hard day's work. He sits down with a huge loaf of bread and a steaming bowl of soup and just starts eating with this robust appetite.
And the students are probably looking on thinking, this is what we're trying to get away from. This is so physical.
They're probably a bit disdainful, but then comes the moment. The peasant takes a spoonful of soup, he closes his eyes, and he lets out this deep, profound sigh of just pure pleasure.
Yeah.
One.
And then what happens?
He looks up to the heavens and he just says, loud enough for them to hear, "Ah, Master of the universe, thank you. Thank you so much for creating such delicious food."
And this wasn't just him reciting a blessing. The key detail is that this was a spontaneous explosion of gratitude, driven by the sheer physical joy of that moment.
And that's the Beshit's lesson. He turns to his students and tells them that this peasant, with his simple joy in his soup, just inserted the divine presence into the lowest physical matter. He made a dwelling for God right there in his stomach.
So while they were trying to escape the world,
He was sanctifying it. And the Baal Shem Tov told them that his act was higher, more effective than all of their fasts and self-denial. The goal isn't to escape the world, it's to integrate God into it.
and that is the most practical takeaway for now, for anyone listening, we don't have to flee our lives to find connection. The challenge is to take the most mundane acts, eating your lunch, doing your work, playing with your kids, and infuse them with a moment of deliberate gratitude and joy.
You transform your physical reality into a sanctuary.
So, to bring it all together, joy isn't this passive reward you get when life is perfect. It's an active tool. It's a spiritual drill, mikdak, designed for use right when things are toughest.
And we have to be real. Life is going to give us darkness, stress, conflict, fear. That's a given. The work is to perform an opposite action when that hits, a deliberate, generated act of joy.
And it can be so practical. The sources say, when you feel that tension rising, just put on some music, force a smile, stop what you're doing, and name 3 small things you're grateful for, even if it feels completely artificial at first.
Because the action comes first. The action generates the feeling. You use the tool of joy to make things better. You don't wait for them to get better on their own.
Because the truth we're learning is that the divine presence is already there, in your midst. Your only job is to generate the frequency, that intentional, physical, boundary-breaking joy that lets your soul actually perceive it.
Joy makes the invisible visible. It makes what feels distant immediate.
So here's the challenge. If taking a single moment to feel thankful for a simple bowl of soup can shake the heavens, what is one ordinary physical moment in your life this week? Maybe it's the first sip of coffee, the warmth of your bed, the commute to work. Can you pick one of those moments and consciously elevate it with pure, deliberate joy? Use that small, mundane act to test this revolutionary idea for yourself, that your joy is the magnet for light.